as soon as one could grasp the elephant, one could see it. And I've just done another manuscript in which the title didn't say anything, so I was thinking about a new title, but in thinking about the new title to suggest to the author, I realized that calling it At Risk, that in fact the point of the story is that everyone in the book is a risk junkie.
Right.
They're all adrenaline junkies. And suddenly the book will hang together if the woman who goes for the quick sex and the, you know, the guy who's willing to get beat up to protect the horses and the vet who's doing sort of a Dick Francis book. And Francis, in fact, I think was very much addicted to, you know, risk junkie kind of people.
Certainly, yeah.
That was sort of his form.
Well, he was one himself.
Yeah, but it's interesting that a book can exist and neither the author nor the editor can quite get to terms for a long time with what it is. And then you have this sort of epiphany one day when you suddenly, it snaps up and you say, oh, that's what it's all about.
That's right. And it was explained to me that in the world of publishing as a whole, you know, so many people have got to communicate with so many other people down a chain. For that, the acquiring editor has got to speak to the editorial board, who've got to speak to marketing and sales, and then sales have got to speak to the bookstore buyer, and then, you know, the bookstore workers. You've got to reduce everything to 3 words, of which the first 2 are "it's about." And
That's 3 words.
Yeah, so you're left with 1 word, "it's about," and that does focus your mind, and it kind of makes you think, okay, now what is this actually about? And the book I've just finished writing that will come out next year, I did think of it in that way. I thought, what is this about? And I figured, actually I do know what this one is about. Some of the others I don't know what they're about.
Well, and you've gained experience,
Yeah.
so maybe, you know, you're more into that. Well, going back to my original thing about Al Zuckerman, we've talked about newsworthy hotspots or uncharted territory, and I think we can now see that not only does Reacher exist in his own uncharted territory, but in each book he ventures into some interesting locale. Okay, the main characters, next point, should loom larger than life. Well, we've talked about that too, that we've got Reacher, who's really kind of, he's actually akin to Philip Marlowe, the Raymond Chandler character, but he goes all the way back to Gawain and the Green Knight, or Beowulf, or whatever you want to talk about.
Absolutely,
or the cave guy, you know, fighting the tiger.
Yeah.
So I think that you from the beginning, did set him up to be larger than life.
Definitely, yeah, because it's, you know, I think we do this for fun, both writing and reading, and there's really no fun in reading about kind of miserable, flawed, weak people. And it was always my plan that he should have none of the kind of popular character flaws that a lot of genre heroes are getting these days. You know, he was not going to be divorced and upset about it. He was not going to be a recovering alcoholic. He was not going to be traumatized because he killed his former partner by mistake. All of these sort of normal things that crop up in the books, I was not going to use. I was going to have a completely straightforward hero, strong in mind, strong in body, self-confident, and untroubled. And then again, of course, as we just said before, you don't really know what it is you're doing, and so I wrote the first book, Killing Floor, and afterwards I figured, well, wait a minute, theoretically, if this is a guy with kind of no problems, he must be a very boring character. But he clearly wasn't. And I realized what I'd actually done was, he has a lot of problems, all kinds of quirks and eccentricities and weirdnesses. The point is that he doesn't know that he's got them. So that you've got all the edge that comes from a complex character, but you've got none of the navel-gazing self-pity that is so tedious. He thinks he's completely normal, and we as readers can see that he isn't actually, which conflict is really, I think, gives the series its strength.
It does, but he's also a character that people who meet him can use him. I mean, Carmen must have known that instinctively.
Yeah.
And it really comes up, of course, in Without Fail. But let me get to my other point. Like Hollywood blockbusters, big hits should be high concept with high stakes, and points of view should be multiple. And I think in your most recent book, Without Fail, is one where you really have kicked it up to high stake, high concept, different points of view, because what we have here is the Secret Service, Reacher's brother, we learn, has died serving in the Secret Service, and left behind a woman who was desperately attached to him, who's now on a career ladder of her own. And when she runs into what looks like a potential disaster, she thinks about Reacher. as a legacy,
Mm-hmm.
and goes and, you know, hunts him down. And we're talking now about, is somebody really trying to assassinate the U.S. Vice President?
Uh-huh.
You've gone about as high concept here and high stake as you can.
Yeah, and I mean, the Zuckerman book, which I've read, is I think really talking about books that are much more kind of Tom Clancy, Ken Follett type of books, or Frederick Forsyth, let's
Right.
say, than these. And so I was almost a little wary of doing that, because I was thinking, you know, there's an inflation sets in effectively, whereby, you know, it's not about saving one person from a homicidal maniac. You've got to write about saving a stadium full of people,
Sure,
or a
it's
city full
global,
of people.
which
Yeah.
is an adjective I hate when we get to
Yeah,
this.
well, it literally is. It's global. And then, you know, by the time a few people have done the book where you're saving a stadium full of people or a city full of people, then you've got to do a book about saving a subcontinent full of people and then saving the world. And very quickly you've inflated yourself out of business. And which is why I made it the vice president rather than the president, because I didn't want to get into this thing of, you know, zooming to the highest of high concepts. I wanted it kind of interesting, high level, but not outrageous.
True, but the way you've got this series set up, you can retreat from it.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be driven into having to go global with the next one. But I am going to find it interesting if what Zuckerman says, this is what needs to happen to do the blockbuster novel. And it's not that I have any particular credence here for Al Zuckerman. I just had to be writing about it, and it struck me. If this is the book that made it, you know, up on the top of the London Times list, if this is the book that does, you know, best on the New York Times list, then will it be because you've written, is it because it's your sixth book and there's a body of work that propels it, which is one dynamic, or is it in fact that this subject, which is, after all, given 9/11, a particularly topical subject, is it that's going to capture the fancy? And then, of course, whatever happens, if you've gone up like that, you have the luxury of backing down some, but your readers will stay with you, so you could write a smaller subject or a different subject next time without having to do this inflation that you're talking about, which is, I hope you won't, because I'm bored by inflation.
Yeah, me too, and that's, you know, that is the plan. That we've talked about how they can be set anywhere geographically, but they can also be set anywhere in terms of concept. In other words, you can have, without fail, is, you know, it's as big and glossy as it gets, with Washington, D.C. and the White House. You know, they're in the White House basement and they're, you know, talking to the head of the FBI. I mean, it's a glossy federal big government story. But I can pitch it anywhere next time.
You can, and Reacher is not addicted to this kind of thing. He isn't going to have, like, tasted the power and then want to stick it.
No.
He's probably, in fact, going to want to go into full retreat because this isn't what he wants to do anyway.
Well, the New York Times review had a sentence that I thought was clever, and, you know, the woman had obviously understood the book very well. She said, the last line was something like, you know, Reacher is doing whatever he was doing in a world that he did not make and cannot wait to escape, which I thought was very perceptive, because that is how he feels, I think. As you said, he's got the skills. There's a certain noblesse oblige about exercising them. There's even a certain fascination on his own behalf. Is he still up to the mark? But he doesn't need to be involved in that. He doesn't depend on it, and he's quite happy when it all comes to an end.
So here we are. You're a Brit. You were born in the middle of Britain in Coventry. You're too young to remember, I suppose, the disaster of Coventry in the war, where it was sort of offered up.
I can remember the aftermath of it, because, you know, that is one thing about Britain, was that, and really one thing that informed the early part of my life to a large extent, is that it took a very long time to recover. And so I was actually born 9 years after the war finished, and therefore that must have been, I guess, 13 years after Coventry was destroyed. And when I was about 3 or 4, so this would now be, what, kind of 17 years after the bombing raid on Coventry, it was a kind of Saturday afternoon trip to go and watch the new cathedral being built next to the ruins of the old cathedral.